Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Emily Hiles, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Wing Commander Shane McBride. This evening, we are honoured to acknowledge Ms. Irene Fellon, NATO Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security, and her accompanying delegation. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Club Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors to the memorial and students on behalf of Margaret River Senior High School from Margaret River, Western Australia. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. Students, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where family and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament. Flowers of the forest, wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to gunner Alfred James Bone. Alfred Bone was born in Brisbane on the 14th of February 1906, the son of Henry and Elizabeth Bone. After his schooling, he went on to work as a wharf labourer before enlisting in the 2nd Australian Imperial Force on the 19th of June 1940 at the age of 34. 4 days after enlisting, Bone marched into Enoggera camp and began training. The following month, he joined the newly established 2nd 10th Field Regiment, one of the 8th Division's 3 artillery regiments. From October to December, the 2nd 10th conducted field manoeuvres and trained with 18-pounder guns from the First World War. A high point of their training was a 9-day field manoeuvre through the Brisbane Valley, with live shooting, firing from Caloundra Range. The men were given leave in January 1941, and in February began moving from Redbank Camp to the South Brisbane Railway Station for travel to Sydney. They arrived at Circular Quay the next day and boarded the Queen Mary, which had been converted from a passenger ship to a troop ship. Travelling in a convoy taking troops of the 8th Division to Malaya and Singapore, Bone reached Malaya 2.5 weeks later, with the Queen Mary disembarking his unit at Malacca in Johor on the 19th of February. The men took up residence in the Malacca High School and the School of Tranqueua. For the next 2 months, batteries were rotated between the locations. While at Malacca, the regiment was attached to the 8th Division's 22nd Brigade. The regiment trained and carried out manoeuvres at Mersing, where it was located when the Japanese entered the Second World War. In December 1941, Bone was charged with using insubordinate language to a superior and received a fine for this breach in military discipline. In early 1942, the regiment was re-equipped with 25-pounders, replacing the old 18-pounders. 4 days later, the regiment's position was bombed and strafed for the first time by Japanese aircraft. Japanese troops had quickly advanced through Malaya and by January had entered Johor, the city just across the narrow strait from Singapore. The 2nd 10th Field Regiment first went into action on the 21st of January, when it was called upon to bring down artillery fire on Japanese troops along the Mersing to Undao Road, north of Lalang Hill. The Japanese force had cut off a platoon from the 2nd 20th Battalion, but the regiment's fire allowed the platoon to escape. The 2nd 10th was in action from then on, firing on targets in the Mayang Estate and Lalang Hill. During the night of the 26th of January, the regiment provided artillery support for the 22nd Brigade's successful ambush in the Nisdale Estate. After that battle, the regiment withdrew to Singapore Island, which took several days, one gun being moved at a time because of the enemy's air activity. The last of the regiment's troops crossed the causeway to Singapore just after 9 p.m. on the 30th of January. The causeway was demolished the next morning. For the coming battle, the 2nd 10th was located in the northwest of the island. Although the British Commonwealth troops had more guns than the Japanese were able to concentrate their artillery for the attack, while the British artillery had to be distributed across the island. In early February, the 22nd Brigade's area was subjected to an intense artillery barrage by the Japanese. Bone and his comrades returned fire, engaging targets in Johor Bahru, but their effectiveness was limited, as artillery had been ordered to fire no more than 12 rounds per 25-pounder gun per day. This restriction was only lifted after the Japanese invaded the island. The main Japanese assault on Singapore began at 11 p.m. on the 8th of February. Crossing the Johor Strait in barges, by midday the next day, the Japanese had broken through the 22nd Brigade's position. With the Japanese advancing, the regiment was withdrawn to Singapore Harbour. By the 12th of February, Commonwealth troops had withdrawn to the city, forming a defensive perimeter. The 2nd 10th remained in action, firing 2,100 rounds on Bukit Timah village. The next day, the regiment moved to the Tangling Golf Course, where it came under enemy artillery fire and airstrikes. The regiment ceased firing at 10:30 p.m. on the 14th of February, and the next day, the garrison surrendered. With the fall of Singapore, the survivors were imprisoned in the sprawling Changi prisoner of war camp. However, it was not long before they were allocated to external work parties. The first parties were dispatched around Singapore and southern Malaya. Bone, however, suffered from malaria while he was a prisoner and later became part of F Force, one of the last labour forces to leave Changi in mid-April 1943. Many of the men of F Force were unwell even before they left Singapore. Isolated in far-up country Thailand, remote from food and medical supplies, and drenched by monsoonal rains, almost a third of the Australians and 2/3 of the British prisoners would die. Their hardships began when they were packed into suffocating metal railway trucks with little food and water. After reaching Ban Pong in Thailand, F Force was forced to march over 300 kilometres to camps near the border with Burma. Arriving up country in early May, F Force was spread across half a dozen camps spread out towards the border with Burma. From May to October 1943, the men took part in the construction of the Burma-Thailand Railway. Relentless labour on inadequate rations in a deadly tropical environment caused huge losses. By the time the railway was completed in October 1943, at least 2,815 Australians, over 11,000 other Allied prisoners, and perhaps 75,000 Australian labourers were dead. Among their number was 37-year-old Alfred Bone, listed as having died of illness on the 12th of October 1943. His family would not learn of his death for 2 years. Today, his remains lie in Thambaziat War Cemetery in Myanmar, alongside more than 3,000 Commonwealth burials of the Second World War. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left. Among some 40,000 Australians who died while serving during the Second World War. A photograph of his headstone is displayed today by the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Gunner Alfred James Bone. He gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozier or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of our director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support of the Memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.